I think the Templar's most defining characteristic is their ability to cleanse, repair, and replenish themselves and their allies. And while these things are generally attributed to Magicka Templars, I also think they're a pretty big part of the Stamina Templar's identity. So I wanted to make a StamPlar build that heavily leans into that identity and feels very Templar-like. This build is all about being primarily offensively focused, having tons of healing power, providing pretty good group support, and also being very capable in solo situations. It's a great build for battlegrounds, especially solo queue. It also works really well in open world Cyrodiil or Imperial City. It's also a really good build for players who are new to PvP because the gear is all easy to get, the playstyle is really not complicated, and the build kind of has it all. Excellent survivability, very good damage, very good sustain, high mobility, some decent group support, and it's just a fun build to play. It's not a typical heavy armor paladin kind of build. I think of it more like an Athenian warrior or something like that. It's much more of a nimble, agile, athletic kind of playstyle, but it still does fit that divine champion kind of archetype. This is a medium armor build using a two-hander and a bow. For my race, I'm an orc mainly because I'm a big fan of the Swift Warrior passive, but really any stamina race will work just fine if you have a race that you prefer to use. It's not going to make or break the build, so feel free to go right ahead. But I do think the extra speed and cost reduction you get for sprinting from being an orc is really nice on a build like this. For the Mundus Stone, I'm using the Serpent for some extra stamina recovery. For my food, or drink rather, I'm using Dubious Cameron Throne, again for some extra stamina recovery. And for my potions, I'm using standard issue Tri-Stat potions. And you can see the stats here. The unbuffed stats are on the right, and my fully buffed in-combat stats are in the center of the screen. And I'll put a link to the UESP build in the description, so if you want to take a closer look at the details, you can do that. Quick overview of the gear. I'm using Troll King for my monster set. 5 pieces of Bone Pirate on the body. All 7 pieces are medium and penetrable. I'm using Tri-Stat glyphs on my body pieces, but if you don't want to spend the gold on Tri-Stat glyphs, regular stamina glyphs are totally fine. For my jewelry, I'm using the 3-piece endurance set. All 3 pieces are infused. I have 2 weapon damage glyphs and 1 stamina recovery glyph. And for my weapons, I'm using Blessing of Potentates, a sharpened maul on the front bar with a crusher enchantment, and an infused bow on the back bar with a weapon damage enchantment. Let's start with Troll King. This set gives a ton of health recovery when it procs. It will frequently pull you out of an otherwise dire situation, and since we're using Cleansing Ritual, it's really easy to share that nice safety net that this set provides with everyone in the group. It can proc on everyone in the group simultaneously. It has no cooldown. It can just proc again and again and again. It's a very strong set. It fits the theme of the build perfectly, and it pairs very nicely with our 3-piece endurance set. Now, endurance gives us a lot of max health and a whole lot of health recovery, but unlike Troll King, this health recovery is active at all times. So just standing still, doing nothing at all, we can already negate 1 or 2 dots. And when Troll King procs, of course, these two combined are very powerful. The Blessing of Potentates weapons. Remember that weapons count as 2 set items, so we do get that 2-piece bonus. We take 5% less damage from players at all times. 5% less damage may not sound like a whole lot, but that's basically equivalent to the Fortified Brass 5-piece bonus, or to having 3 protective pieces of jewelry. It's actually a significant amount of damage mitigation for not much investment. Bone Pirate. This is a staple PvP set for stamina builds, and for good reason. It gives a whole bunch of maximum stamina, helps out quite a bit with stamina recovery, and it's just a solid set. It's not fancy, but it serves its purpose well. Now, I do want to point out that this set requires that you have a drink buff, not a food buff, active. So if you were thinking of using Artaeum Takeaway Broth instead of Dubious Cameron Throne to get that extra health recovery, that's actually not going to work if you're wearing this set, because Artaeum is a food, not a drink. So you really do have to stick with Dubious Cameron Throne or use a different set. With our 3-piece endurance set, we're sitting at about 1200 health recovery at all times. When Troll King procs, that jumps up to 3200 health recovery, plus all of our actual healing abilities and our mitigation that we get from the Potentate's weapons. With all of that combined, we can be quite difficult to kill. On top of that, we also have extremely good mobility. With our Orc, medium armor, and bow passives, we actually go slightly over the speed cap. And with those same Orc and medium armor passives, we get a 40% cost reduction to sprinting. So our total sprint cost is around 464 stamina per second. But we're also using this ability, Restoring Focus, which gives us 240 stamina every second. And while stamina recovery is disabled while you're sprinting, this isn't stamina recovery. This is just a skill giving you stamina. And so this remains active while you're sprinting. And so when you factor that in, your sprint cost is functionally more like 224 stamina per second, which is less than what it would cost if we had the well-fitted trait on all 7 of our armor pieces. So it kind of feels like a loophole. It kind of feels like a well-fitted build, but it isn't. So yeah, excellent healing, excellent mobility. At the same time, we have a very respectable amount of weapon damage, a very comfortable amount of sustain, good group support. That's what I mean when I said the build kind of has it all. It feels like I'm really not having to make any sacrifices. Let's talk about the skills. For my main spammable, of course, I'm using Biting Jabs, which deals a ton of damage. It's also an AoE ability, which means it's a Nightblade's worst nightmare. You can use this ability to pull Nightblades out of stealth and keep them out of stealth while also dealing a lot of damage. And if they happen to be a fairly inexperienced player, oftentimes this alone is enough to take them out. And we also get that nice Major Savagery crit bonus when we use this as well. Power of the Light. This is our main burst damage ability. You tag your target with this, then lay as much damage into them as you possibly can. And then after 6 seconds, this ability will pop, and if you've done your job right, they'll hopefully be dead or nearly dead at that point. It also applies Minor Fracture and Minor Breach, which is a very rare debuff. Binding Javelin, this is just a single target ranged stun. It's a pretty basic ability, but it's also kind of indispensable. It can be used offensively and defensively, and it ignores resistance, so that sort of low tooltip actually deals a decent amount of damage. Rally, this is where we get our major damage buff. It also offers a huge burst heal on the second cast or when it expires, so just be sure to keep this active at all times because you never know when you're going to need that clutch rally heal. And it also gives us minor endurance for an extra 10% stamina recovery. Repentance, use it to drain nearby corpses to restore stamina and health to yourself and your allies. The amount of resources you restore is based on the number of corpses that are around, so it can potentially be a whole lot. It doesn't matter if the corpses are enemies or allies, you can drain pretty much anything. So if one of your teammates dies, you can drain their corpse and their sacrifice hopefully wasn't totally in vain. The best part is it's free to cast. And while slotted, we get minor fortitude, endurance, and intellect. So all 3 recovery types are increased by 10%. Now, of course, we're already getting minor endurance from rally, so there's a bit of redundancy there, but no big deal. And for my main offensive ultimate, I'm using Empowering Sweep. The best thing about this ultimate is the low cost. It's almost always ready when you need it. It hits really hard, looks really cool, and no cast time. On the back bar, I'm using Caltrops. This gives us a few good things. For one, it's a strong AoE snare, which synergizes really nicely with our mobility. We're already a lot faster than most other players while also slowing them down, so we're just widening that discrepancy even more. It also gives an AoE Major Fracture, which is awesome for team play. I can debuff an entire group with just one button. And with this ability, Minor Fracture, my Maul, the Sharpened trait, and my Crusher glyph, I'm looking at about 15,000 penetration, which for a non-CP stamina build, that's quite a lot of penetration, and it's a pretty big factor in our overall damage output. Extended Ritual. This ability is basically the best thing about being a Templar. If you ever spend a lot of time on a Templar and then play on a non-Templar class, this is probably the ability that you're going to miss the most. It immediately removes 5 negative effects from yourself. It puts a huge circle on the ground that provides a pretty strong heal over time to you and your allies. It also offers a synergy for your allies to cleanse themselves. And it's also another AoE snare due to the Sacred Ground passive. And it pairs really nicely with Troll King because since it covers such a huge area, there's a good chance that everyone is standing inside of it while fighting. And so if they ever dip below 50% health, they'll get a tick of healing from Cleansing Ritual, then Troll King will kick in to help them out even more. This is also our one and only Magicka ability, which I think that's one of the StamPlar's biggest advantages. They really don't need to invest in Magicka at all because they only use one Magicka ability. I've invested a little bit by using Tri-Stat glyphs, but really that's not even necessary. Even without Tri-Stat glyphs, you'll still have more than plenty of Magicka. Poison Injection, I'm just using this for a little extra damage output, and the execute damage is nice. I don't really have any execute damage otherwise, so it's nice to have that little extra sauce when my targets are low on health. Restoring Focus, we talked about this a little bit earlier. It gives us 240 stamina per second while active, and it also gives us our major resistance buffs. The amount of resistance it provides is increased if you're standing on top of the rune, but we're usually utilizing quite a lot of mobility, so we're rarely standing still long enough to benefit from that. But do note that the major resistance buffs and the stamina return remain active whether you're standing on top of it or not. And it's yet another snare because of the Sacred Ground passive. This is a stamina build, so of course we have Resolving Vigor slotted. This is our main healing ability. In an emergency situation, first thing you do is cleanse, then use Vigor, and if you still need more healing, swap to your front bar and use Rally, and you're probably good to go from there. And for my back bar defensive ultimate, I'm using Reviving Barrier. This is a really great ultimate. It gives you and your nearby group members a huge damage shield for 30 whole seconds, and it gives a pretty decent heal over time for the first 15 seconds. It's a really great buffer to let your Cleansing Ritual and Troll King do their thing. This will absolutely save your group from wiping. That's it for the skill bars. I just want to briefly mention some important passives. So of course you want to have all your racial passives, all your class passives, all your two-hander and bow passives, and all your medium passives, except the improved sneak passive is not required. You don't need any heavy or light armor passives because we're not wearing any heavy or light armor. You want to be sure and pick up Banish the Wicked from the Fighters Guild just for a little bit of extra ultimate return when you kill a vampire or a werewolf. You also want to be sure and pick up the Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal passives. And from the Assault skill line, be sure and get Combat Frenzy for even more ultimate when you kill a player. And very important, from the Alchemy skill line, be sure and get Medicinal Use so that you can get the most out of your potions. The basic offensive combo is pretty easy. You just throw caltrops on top of your enemy, hit them with Poison Injection, then swap to your front bar and tag them with Power of the Light, hit them with your Empowering Sweep ultimate, then stun them with your Javelin, then lay into them with your jabs. So I think that's everything. Be sure and check out the UESP link in the description if you want to take a closer look at the build. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment or email me at ketsparrowhawk@gmail.com. And until next time, good luck out there.